She looked up from the counter, rain dripping from her worn apron, and saw him, a boy in a wheelchair, alone, shivering under the awning. Maggie Harper didn't hesitate. She ran into the storm, her sneakers splashing through puddles, and pulled him inside Haven Street Diner. A grilled cheese, a smile, small acts in a big, cold world. But someone was watching. Victor Grayson, billionaire titan of Grayson Dynamics, stood in the shadows, his sharp gaze locked on her. He didn't believe in kindness, not without a price. But what she did that night cracked something in him, something he couldn't shake. A debt, a chance, or a trap waiting to snap shut. By morning, he was at her door, an envelope in hand, and an offer that would change everything. From a rain-soaked diner to a corporate empire, Maggie's heart pulled her into a storm she couldn't predict. Trust would be tested, secrets would bleed, and a twist would turn her world upside down. Who's the real enemy? And what does kindness cost when power's on the line? You won't see this ending coming. Hit that like button if you're ready for a story that'll grip you till the last second. Subscribe and ring the bell. Don't miss how one night in the rain sparked a fire that changed lives forever. Drop a comment. What would you do for a stranger? Let's get this conversation blazing. The rain came down in sheets, relentless and cold, drumming against the cracked pavement of Haven Street like 1,000 restless fingers. Tucked between a pawn shop with its flickering "Cash Now" sign and a laundromat that smelled perpetually of bleach, Haven Street Diner stood as a stubborn beacon in the gloom. Its neon sign buzzed faintly, casting a watery green glow over the wet asphalt, a heartbeat flickering in the dark belly of Chicago's outskirts. Inside, the air was thick with the bitter tang of burnt coffee and the sizzle of bacon grease spitting on the grill. It was a place that clung to life, worn but warm, like an old coat you couldn't bear to throw away. Maggie Harper stood behind the counter, her hands moving in practiced rhythm as she wiped down the chip formica with a rag that had seen better days. At 29, she carried the weight of a life stretched thin, her chestnut hair pulled into a messy bun, strands escaping like whispers of exhaustion. Her hazel eyes, though, still burned with a quiet fire, a warmth that refused to fade despite the endless grind of waiting tables. She'd grown up poor, raised by a grandmother whose voice still echoed in her mind. Kindness is a flame that never dies, Maggie. Keep it burning, even in the dark. That lesson was her inheritance, richer than any dollar she'd ever earned. Tonight, the diner was a ghost town. The clock above the grill ticked toward 9 p.m., its hands dragging through the hours. A lone trucker hunched over a beer in the corner, his cap pulled low, while a college kid tapped furiously at a laptop, earbuds drowning out the world. Maggie's apron hung heavy with the day's measly tips, $8 and change, half of which she'd already slipped to the shivering vet who camped out by the dumpster. She'd walk home again, sneakers squelching through puddles, because that's who she was, the woman who gave when she had nothing left to give. She was mid-wipe, the rag squeaking against the counter, when something caught her eye beyond the rain-streaked glass. A small figure huddled beneath the diner's sagging awning, barely visible through the downpour. Maggie squinted, her heart giving a sharp tug as the shape resolved into a boy, no older than 8, slumped in a wheelchair. His thin frame was swallowed by a threadbare jacket, dark hair plastered to his forehead, and his hands clutched a tattered blanket that did little to shield him from the wet. He stared at the ground, shoulders trembling, a lost speck in the storm. Maggie didn't think twice. She tossed the rag aside, grabbed a clean towel from the stack behind the counter, and pushed through the door. The rain hit her like a slap, icy needles stinging her skin as it soaked through her faded blue uniform. She crouched beside the boy, her knees sinking into a puddle, and softened her voice over the roar of the storm. "Hey, little man, what are you doing out here? You're gonna catch your death in this mess." The boy looked up, his wide blue eyes shimmering with uncertainty, like twin pools reflecting a sky too heavy to hold. I'm waiting," he mumbled, voice so small it nearly drowned in the patter of rain. His fingers tightened around the blanket, knuckles pale. "Waiting for who?" Maggie glanced up and down the empty street. Nothing but shadows and the glint of wet cars parked blocks away. No parent, no guardian, just this kid alone in the cold. Her chest tightened. Well, you can't wait out here. Come on inside with me. It's warm, and I've got something better than rain to fill your belly. He hesitated, those big eyes searching her face, then gave a shy nod. Maggie flashed a grin, tucking the towel around his shoulders as she wheeled him through the door. The diner's heat wrapped around them like a hug, chasing off the chill. She settled him in a booth near the radiator, its faint hum a comforting pulse, and crouched to his level. I'm Maggie, she said, brushing a damp strand of hair from his face. What's your name, tough guy? Tommy, he replied, a tiny smile tugging at his lips as the warmth seeped into him. Tommy, huh? That's a hero's name if I ever heard one. She straightened up, already heading for the kitchen. You like grilled cheese? Say yes, because I'm making it anyway. She didn't wait for an answer, her sneakers squeaking on the linoleum as she moved. Minutes later, she slid back into the booth with a steaming plate, a golden grilled cheese sandwich, the cheese oozing out the sides paired with a mug of tomato soup that smelled like home. On the house, she said, tucking a napkin into his lap. Eat up, kiddo. Heroes need fuel. Tommy's eyes lit up as he took a bite, the cheese stretching in gooey strings that made him giggle. This is the best thing ever, he said, his voice stronger now, a spark igniting in those blue depths. Maggie laughed, sliding into the seat across from him. Glad you think so. Now tell me, what's your favorite superhero? And don't say Batman unless you've got a good reason. For a moment, the world outside faded. The rain, the empty street, the weight of her long shift. It was just her and Tommy, trading stories about caped crusaders and bright colors, his laughter a melody she hadn't known she needed. What Maggie didn't see was the pair of sharp gray eyes watching from across the street, hidden behind the tinted glass of a sleek black Bentley. A man sat in silence, his tailored suit stark against the leather seats, his gaze locked on the diner's glowing window. He'd come to pick up his son, but what he saw through the rain was something he hadn't expected. A stranger lighting a flame he'd long thought extinguished. The rain hammered Haven Street Diner's windows, a ceaseless roar that swallowed the quiet inside. Maggie Harper leaned across the booth, her hazel eyes catching the flicker of the neon sign as it danced across Tommy's face. The boy, 8 years old, fragile in his wheelchair, grinned through a smear of melted cheese, his small hands clutching the crust of his grilled cheese sandwich. Spider-Man would totally beat Batman, he said, his voice brighter now, the chill of the storm chased away by her warmth. Maggie smirked, brushing a damp strand of chestnut hair from her face. No contest. Batman's too busy brooding to dodge those webs. She glanced at the clock, 9:20 p.m., and her chest tightened. The street outside was a black abyss, rain sheeting across the pavement, no headlights cutting through. Tommy had said he was waiting for his dad, but the minutes stretched and her gut churned with a familiar dread. Kids left behind, promises broken. She'd seen it too many times at this diner, and she'd be damned if Tommy joined that list. Your dad's running late, huh? She asked, keeping her tone light. He's busy, Tommy mumbled, his smile faltering, fingers twisting the edge of his tattered blanket. He told me to wait here. Maggie forced a grin, sliding a second cookie across the table. Well, you've got me till he shows. Deal? Tommy nodded and she settled back, her apron heavy with the day's thin tips. $8, half already, slipped to the vet, shivering outside. She'd walk home again, rain or not, because that's who she was, the woman who gave when her own pockets were empty. Across the street, Victor Grayson sat rigid in his Bentley, the rain drumming a war beat on the roof. At 46, he was a man of edges, gray eyes sharp as flint, a jawline that could carve stone, his tailored black suit a shield against the world. Grayson Dynamics, his billion-dollar tech empire, bowed to his will, built on ruthless precision. But tonight, that precision was fracturing. Tommy's nurse had quit that morning, a terse "I'm out" text, leaving him juggling fatherhood and a crumbling deal with Tokyo investors. He'd parked a block away, told Tommy to wait by the diner while he salvaged the call, expecting a quick retrieval. Then he saw her. Through the blurred glass, Victor watched Maggie dart into the rain, her faded uniform soaking through as she knelt beside his son. He saw her wheel Tommy inside, her hands gentle as she draped a towel over his shoulders, her laugh cutting through the storm as she slid that plate across the table. Tommy's face lit up, blue eyes wide, a smile Victor hadn't seen in months, and something in him snapped. His son's illness had stolen his steps, turned Victor into a man who bought solutions, doctors, therapies, walls of control. But this woman, this stranger, gave what his billions couldn't, a moment of pure, uncalculated light. He yanked out his phone, voice low and jagged. Clara, Haven Street Diner. Now jeans, hoodie. Blend in. 10 minutes. Clara's reply was instant. On it, sir. Victor's grip tightened on the wheel, his mind a battlefield. Kindness like that didn't exist in his world, not without strings. Who was she? And why did she dare to breach his fortress? 20 minutes later, the diner door jingled, and Clara slipped in, her blonde hair shoved under a hood, her usual polish buried in denim. She zeroed in on Tommy, still chatting with Maggie as she refilled his milk, her easy grin masking the steel in her spine. Clara approached, voice strained. Hey, Tommy, time to roll. Your ride's waiting. Tommy pouted, clutching his cookie. Just a little longer? Maggie's head snapped up, her diner-sharp instincts flaring. You know him? She asked, her tone soft but laced with a blade. Clara flinched, nodding too fast. Yeah, his aunt. Picking him up for his dad. Maggie's eyes narrowed, the twitch in Clara's lip, the way her hands fumbled the hoodie strings. She didn't buy it, but Tommy's ease held her back. She handed him a napkin-wrapped cookie. Stay safe, sweetie. Doors open anytime. Clara wheeled him out, her breath shallow as they hit the street. Victor stepped into the downpour, rain streaking his suit as he knelt by Tommy, his towering frame shrinking for his son. Good time, champ? Maggie's awesome, Dad, Tommy said, beaming. She gave me food for free, said kindness doesn't have a price. She didn't even care about money. Victor's chest caved, the word free a gunshot in his world of transactions. He ruffled Tommy's hair, bearing the storm inside. Get in, kiddo. I'll be right there. Clara buckled him in, and Victor lingered, rain dripping from his coat as he stared back at the diner. Maggie was at the counter wiping it down, her silhouette a quiet defiance against the neon glow. Clara, he said, voice a growl, find out who she is. Everything, name, address, past. By sunrise. That night, Maggie slogged home, rain pooling in her sneakers. Her $8 tips cut to $4 after a crumpled bill went to the guy under the awning. Her apartment door creaked open, a dim cave of sagging furniture and library books. She was peeling off her wet apron when a knock cracked the silence, sharp as thunder. Through the peephole, a tall figure loomed, dark coat, shadowed face, a storm-made flesh. Her pulse spiked. She cracked the door, hand on the frame. Who's this? Margaret Harper? His voice was gravel, commanding, slicing through the damp air. Yeah, and you are? Victor Grayson. He paused, letting it hang, but her blank stare offered no recognition. I need to talk. Inside? Maggie hesitated, then stepped back, curiosity outweighing the warning in her gut. He strode in, his presence swallowing her tiny room, 6 feet of tailored menace against her thrift store life. His eyes swept the space. Bare walls, a single bulb, then locked on her, piercing. Last night, you fed a boy in a wheelchair, took him in from the rain. That was my son, Tommy. I saw it all. Tommy's your kid? Maggie's voice hitched, surprise softening her guard. He was out there alone. I couldn't leave him. He okay? Better than he's been in years, Victor said, a crack splintering his steel. He told me you didn't charge him, treated him like he wasn't broken. That's been clawing at me since. It was just food, she said, shifting, uneasy under his stare. Not to me. He pulled an envelope from his coat, slamming it onto her wobbly table. Work for me, Grayson Dynamics. 6 figures, benefits, a real life. Not a handout, a debt I owe. Maggie's jaw dropped. You're out of your mind. I sling coffee. I don't know your world. I don't need your resume, he snapped, voice rising raw. I need someone who sees my son, not my empire. People claw at me daily, leeches after power, using him as bait. You didn't. You just gave. Why me? She demanded, stepping closer, defiance flaring. Because you didn't know, he roared, his control fraying. You didn't see a paycheck or a headline. You saw him. That's rarer than gold in my hell. Maggie's hands shook, doubt crashing against a tide of what-ifs. Tommy's laugh flashed in her mind, a beacon in the rain. I don't know, she stammered. Say yes, he pressed, leaning in, his intensity a wall. But one catch, don't let them snuff that light out. They'll try. Her breath caught, the weight of his words sinking in. All right, she said, voice steadying. Yes. Victor exhaled, a flicker of something, relief, in his eyes. Clara's here at 8 a.m. Don't be late. He turned, coat brushing the door, then paused. Maggie, they'll smell blood. Fight back. The door thudded shut, and voices leaked through. Clara's clipped tones, then a slicker one. A waitress, Victor? How'd she scam that gig? Maggie peeked out, catching a glimpse of Daniel Pierce, his sneer glinting like a knife in the hall's dim light, a shadow she'd soon face head-on. Maggie's yes lingered like smoke in her dim apartment, the echo of Victor Grayson's footsteps fading into the rain-soaked night. She clutched the envelope, her ticket out of Haven Street's grind, her hands trembling with a mix of dread and defiance. The world she'd agreed to enter loomed like a shadow, vast and unforgiving, but Tommy's shy smile flashed in her mind, a tether pulling her forward. She barely slept, the patter of rain against her window a restless drum roll to the unknown. At 8 a.m. sharp, Clara's knock rattled the door. Maggie opened it, still in yesterday's damp jeans, her chestnut hair a messy tangle. Clara, now in a crisp blazer, handed her a badge. Margaret Harper, special advisor to the CEO. The weight of it felt like a chain, or a shield. Ready? Clara asked, her tone clipped but not unkind. No, Maggie admitted, shoving the badge in her pocket. But let's go. Grayson Dynamics hit her like a tidal wave, a gleaming fortress of glass and steel piercing Chicago's skyline. Its lobby a hive of tailored suits and clipped ambition. Her sneakers squeaked on the marble, a stark cry against the staccato of heels, her faded apron swapped for a borrowed jacket that hung too big. Victor met her at the elevator, his gray eyes scanning her like a general sizing up a recruit. You're here because I trust you, he said to the murmuring staff behind him, his voice a blade cutting through the noise. That's enough. Whispers followed, charity case, interloper, and Maggie felt their claws at her back, Victor's warning ringing. They'll smell blood. The first month was a brutal baptism. Meetings drowned her in tech jargon, AI chips, market shares, things she'd never touched at the diner. But she clawed her way through, her street-smart edge sharpening with every question she fired back. She read the room like she'd read customers, Clara's quiet nods, the junior exec's nervous glances, and Daniel Pierce's oily smirks. His, how'd she scam that gig, from that first night festering in her memory. She brought cookies to the break room, grilled cheese echoes in sugar form, and the whispers softened, some even nodding her way. Victor watched from his office, Lake Michigan a slate-gray mirror behind him, her fire thawing his icy empire one stubborn step at a time. Then the storm broke. 4 weeks in, Clara burst into Maggie's cubicle, her face white as the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. Maggie, we're in deep shit, she whispered, eyes darting. The AI chip blueprint, our golden ticket against Nextech, leaked last night. Victor's losing it, and he thinks it's you. Maggie's stomach plummeted, her chair scraping as she shot up. Me? That's insane. I don't even know what that damn chip is. Someone saw you with a Nextech guy at the diner, Clara said, voice tight. Last Tuesday, Victor's tearing through logs, security footage, everything. He's praying it's not you, but the timing. Eddie, Maggie gasped, the name a punch to her gut. She'd gone back to Haven Street after a late shift, apron on out of habit, and Eddie, chipped tooth, easy laugh, had slid into her booth. How's the fancy job? He'd asked, sipping coffee. Better than grease stains, she'd quipped. He'd grinned, paid, and left. Innocent, or so she thought. Now it was a noose tightening, I didn't say squat, Clara. I swear on my life. I believe you, Clara said, grabbing her wrist. But he's in there now, ready to burn it all down. You've got to face him. Maggie stormed Victor's office, rain lashing the floor-to-ceiling windows like a ghost of that first night. He stood behind his desk, tablet in hand, security feeds glowing, his face a mask of rage carved from stone. Sit, he growled, not looking up. Hell no, she snapped, planting herself in front of him, her voice a match to his fire. You think I'd sell you out? After Tommy? After you dragged me here? Tell me I'm wrong. His head snapped up, gray eyes blazing, a storm colliding with hers. I don't want to believe it, he roared, slamming the tablet down, the crack echoing. But you met a Nextech operative, Eddie Russo, their fixer, days before my company started bleeding. Explain that, Maggie. Eddie's a regular, she shouted, stepping into his space, her fists clenched. He's been at the diner for years, coffee and small talk, that's it. I didn't spill your secrets. I don't even know them. You said you trusted me. Was that just bullshit to get me here? Victor's breath hitched, his control splintering. No, he said, voice dropping, raw and ragged. But someone's gutting me, and the evidence points at you. I need proof it's not. Then let me get it, she fired back, her heart pounding but steady. I'm no rat. Not to you, not to Tommy, not to anyone. Give me a shot to fight this. He stared, the silence a battlefield, then nodded, his fury banking into something colder, sharper. Fine, we do this together. Find the bastard. They dove in, a furious tandem, Victor slicing through digital trails, Maggie leaning on her diner-honed gut. She replayed every moment, every face, and Pierce's sneer loomed large, that slick voice in the hall, his constant jabs. How's a waitress outsmart us? She pointed Victor to him. Pierce hates me, she said, hunched over files at 2 a.m., the office dark but for their screens. He's been digging since day one, like I stole his crown. Victor's jaw tightened, pulling Pierce's access logs, late-night entries, encrypted calls to burner phones. Then the dagger, bank records showing millions funneled to a Nextech shell, synced with Eddie's movements. He's not just leaking, Victor snarled, his voice a low thunder. He's selling us out and framing you to cover his ass. Maggie's blood iced. Why me? You're the weak link, he said, eyes blazing. New untested, tied to that diner where he set his trap. Eddie was his bait. You were the fall guy. The next morning, Victor summoned the board to the war room, the air thick with dread. Pierce sauntered in, silk tie glinting, his smirk a taunt, until Victor dropped the hammer. Screens flared with evidence, transfers, call logs, a grainy tape of Pierce and Eddie in a dive bar, his voice clear. Pin it on the waitress. She's nobody. Victor rose, towering over him, his roar shaking the glass. You're done, Pierce. You sold my soul and thought you'd walk? Security, get him out. Pierce's face crumpled, his swagger evaporating as guards hauled him away, his shouts fading into the hall. The board sat stunned, the room a graveyard of his ambition. Victor turned to Maggie, rain easing beyond the windows, sunlight slicing through. You didn't just clear your name, he said, voice low, fierce. You saved this empire, mine, Tommy's, everything. I was wrong to doubt you. Maggie met his gaze unflinching. I told you, I don't break trust. Not after that night, not ever. He nodded, a crack in his steel widening. I won't forget this. You're in deep now, part of it all. 5 years had carved a new world from the rain-soaked night that started it all. Grayson Dynamics stood like a beacon over Chicago, its glass walls catching the June sun in a blaze of gold. Maggie Harper, now 34, leaned against the window of her office, once Victor's, her name etched in brass, Chief Strategy Officer. Her chestnut hair was tamed into a sleek knot, her faded jeans swapped for a tailored blazer, but her hazel eyes still burned with that diner-born fire. Kindness forged into steel. The badge in her pocket, Margaret Harper, Special Advisor, was a worn relic, a quiet reminder of the leap she'd taken when Victor's envelope hit her table. The journey had been a war. After Pierce's betrayal, Maggie hadn't just survived Grayson Dynamics, she'd conquered it. She'd turned her street-smart edge into a blade, cutting through corporate games with a clarity that stunned the suits. The break room still smelled of her cookies, a defiant echo of grilled cheese that softened the edges of this glass empire. Colleagues who'd sneered at the waitress now leaned on her voice a steady pulse in a world of chaos. Victor had watched her rise, his trust, tested in that stormy crucible, hardening into something unbreakable, a bond deeper than blood. But today wasn't about power. Maggie adjusted her jacket, her fingers brushing that old badge, and headed to Lincoln High School. The auditorium thrummed with life, parents clutching bouquets, grads buzzing with restless energy, the air thick with summer heat and hope. She slid into a seat beside Victor, now 51, his silver-streaked hair catching the light, his suit sharp but his gray eyes soft with a father's quiet ache. "Nervous?" he asked, his voice a low rumble. "For Tommy? Never," Maggie said, her grin fierce. "He's ready to light the world up." The principal's voice boomed, "Thomas Grayson!" The crowd hushed as Tommy wheeled onto the stage, 13 and radiant, his dark hair tousled, his blue eyes blazing with a fire all his own. He adjusted the mic, his wheelchair a throne, and spoke, his voice clear as a bell. "I used to think strength was walking tall," he said, pausing, letting the words sink in. "But it's lifting others when you can't stand. I learned that from a grilled cheese in the rain, from a woman who saw me when I was invisible." Maggie's breath caught, tears pricking as Tommy's gaze locked on hers. Victor's hand tightened on the armrest, his whisper rough. "That's you, Maggie." Tommy pressed on, his vision spilling out. "I'll build wheelchairs that climb stairs. Freedom for kids like me, so no one's left waiting in the cold." The room erupted, applause crashing like thunder, Maggie clapping through blurred vision. Victor's pride a silent storm beside her. Backstage, she pulled Tommy into a fierce hug, ruffling his hair. "You're a damn hero, kiddo. Spider-Man's got nothing on you." Victor knelt, his voice breaking like waves on stone. "You're my everything, champ. Always." Tommy grinned, wide and bright, and for a moment, the three of them were a constellation. Born in a diner booth, forged in rain and trust, shining now under a sun they'd earned. That night, Maggie stood on a rooftop above Lake Michigan, the city a tapestry of lights below, the water catching the last of the day's gold. Victor joined her, bourbon in hand, the wind tugging at his coat as the horizon swallowed the sun. 5 years, he said, his voice a low thread in the dusk. "I used to think a locked heart kept me strong, kept Tommy safe. You proved it just kept me alone. You and him. You tore me open, made me better." Maggie leaned on the railing, her eyes tracing the skyline, her voice steady but warm. "You gave me a shot to burn brighter, Victor. I ran with it. For Tommy, for me, for everyone I could reach." He turned to her, his gray eyes raw, unguarded. "I thought money was power. Control was everything. You showed me it's nothing without trust. That night in the rain, you fed him when I couldn't. I'll never repay that." "You already did," she said, meeting his gaze. "You saw me too. Gave me this. And Tommy? He's the proof we got it right." Victor raised his glass, the clink against hers a vow sealed in the fading light. "To Tommy? To you?" Her fire had spread beyond them. Flame of haven, born from that rainy night, now blazed across the country. It started with a single kitchen in Chicago, hot meals for kids with empty stomachs, aprons bright as hope. But Maggie had poured her soul into it, her salary first, then Grayson's muscle. Now it fed thousands, coast to coast, a network of light she'd sparked with a sandwich and a smile. She'd turned a corporate titan into a force for good, her legacy a roaring testament to what kindness could build. Haven Street Diner still stood, its neon sign flickering like a heartbeat. Maggie stopped by sometimes, slipping tips to the new crew, sitting in that cracked booth where it began. The rain was a memory now, but its echo lived in every plate Flame served, every kid who didn't go hungry. As the sky deepened to indigo, Victor spoke again, his voice soft as the breeze. "I was wrong about everything. Power, walls, all of it. You made me see what I had all along. Tommy, and a chance to be more than a name on a tower." Maggie smiled, fierce and sure, the city glowing below. And you showed me it's not where you start, it's what you leave behind. Tommy's our flame, Victor. He's burning bright now. The lights of Chicago shimmered, a testament to a spark that became a wildfire. Tommy's voice lingered from that stage. A boy once lost in rain, now a beacon of hope. A future Maggie had ignited, Victor had nurtured, and the world would carry forward. The diner's neon pulsed in the distance, a quiet promise that even the smallest act could light the dark forever. The story is a journey from a rain-drenched night to a blazing dawn, teaching us that kindness, trust, and resilience can transform the world. Maggie Harper, with a simple grilled cheese offered in a storm, ignited a flame that warmed Tommy and grew into Flame of Haven, feeding thousands. Proof that even the smallest act of kindness can plant seeds for greatness. Victor Grayson, once a cold billionaire barricaded by power, discovered that trust, fragile as it was, held the strength to shatter his walls, saving his empire from the venomous betrayal of Daniel Pierce, a foe lurking in plain sight. Tommy, the boy shivering under an awning, turned his limits into a launch pad, dreaming of stair-climbing wheelchairs to free others like him, showing that no barrier is too high when you dare to reach beyond it. Ultimately, the story reveals that true legacy lies not in wealth or titles, but in the hope and goodness you sow, like Maggie, Victor, and Tommy did, leaving a fire that burns forever in others' hearts. In a world of shadows and cold, will you choose to be a flame or let the darkness win?